class. Today I'm going to be showing you the appropriate way to take a patient's vital signs. So I have my patient here. This is actually my husband Luke, and he's going to be our patient for us today. First thing I'm going to do is put on my gloves. All right. And the next thing we're going to do is we take a blood pressure in 2 steps. So the first thing we're going to do is estimate the systolic blood pressure, and then we're going to measure it. So to estimate the systolic blood pressure, what we'll first do is have the patient's arm just about at heart level, and then we're going to take our 2 fingers and find the brachial pulse and palpate it. Once we've found that, we're going to place the cuff snugly on the patient's arm over top of the skin, not on top of the clothing. Like that. Then we're going to find the radial pulse. Make sure that we feel that, again, with 2 fingers, not the thumb. Okay? The next step we're going to do is take our stethoscope, change it to the bell side so that you can hear here. So while I'm holding this here, I'm actually going to ask my patient to hold that there. Thank you. While he's holding that, I'm going to feel his radial pulse here, and then I'm going to pump up the cuff until I don't feel his radial pulse anymore. Here we go. So I stopped feeling his pulse at right around 140. Now I'm going to deflate the cuff completely and let his arm rest. Great. Now we're going to take that number 140 and we're going to inflate the cuff up 30 millimeters of mercury past where we felt that radial pulse disappear. So I'm going to pump the cuff up to 170. And then I'm going to slowly let the cuff deflate at about 2 to 3 millimeters of mercury per second. And I'm going to listen for the heart sounds. I heard his first heart sound at around 108. That's called the systolic blood pressure. And then the last heart sound I heard at 76. It's called the diastolic blood pressure. And that's called measuring the blood pressure. All right. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the patient's pulse rate. So what we're going to do is we're going to palpate the radial pulse, again with 2 fingers, not with a thumb, and we're going to count for 30 seconds. Okay, I got 38, so we're going to take 38 times 2 to give us his heart rate. 38 times 2 is 76, so his heart rate is 76. The next thing we're going to do is measure his orthostatic blood pressure. So with orthostatic blood pressure, the first thing we want to do is have the patient laying supine. So I'm going to ask the patient to stand up and lay on the table for me. put your head here. All right. So now with the patient supine, we would check blood pressure again here and heart rate in the same fashion that we checked it before. The next thing we're going to do is, in real life, you're going to wait 3 minutes, and then you're going to ask the patient to sit up. So sit up, patient. With the feet dangling off the bed, as you'll see here, and then we're going to check the blood pressure again in this arm, and heart rate as well. Then we would wait 3 minutes and then ask the patient to stand. And then we would check the blood pressure again here and check the heart rate again here. That's called taking an orthostatic blood pressure, and you'll learn more about that in your lecture about what those things mean, and also when we get to the cardiology unit. Okay, I'm going to have the patient sit back down again. Great. So the next thing we want to do is take the patient's respiratory rate. So when we take the patient's respiratory rate, what we want to do is inconspicuously watch the rise and the fall of the chest for 30 seconds, and then multiply that times 2. So you need to do it inconspicuously, because if the patient knows that you're watching them, they tend to breathe a little bit faster and a little bit more purposefully, and you're trying to get an accurate representation of what their respiratory rate actually is. So one way I recommend doing this is, if you can, go ahead and, while you're getting the heart rate, count for 30 seconds, but actually have your hand on the patient's wrist for the full 60, and then for the second 30 seconds, watch the patient's chest rise and fall. So you can see rising and falling pretty much in the upper region of the chest. And then, like I said, you would count that for 30 seconds and then multiply times 2 to obtain the correct respiratory rate. Remember, that rate is going to be somewhere between 14 and 20 for a healthy adult. All right, the next thing that we're going to do is mention that temperature, height, and weight are all part of vital signs. We don't actually have you take those on your standardized patients. You'll just mention those, just verbalize them. The next thing you're going to do is you're going to tell us how to determine the body mass index, the BMI, and that's determined by kilograms over meters squared. The next thing we're going to do is measure the patient's girth. So we're going to have the patient stand up. And we're going to expose the patient's abdomen. Hold your shirt here for me. And we're going to take our measuring tape and measure at the level of the navel. There we go. In centimeters. Excuse me, in inches, not centimeters. Apologize. There we go. This patient's waist circumference is 33.5 inches. And what I want you to tell me about that, when you measure that abdominal girth on the patient, is that for females, a waist circumference over 35 inches, or for males, a waist circumference over 40 inches puts the patient at a higher risk for metabolic diseases. And the last thing with this lab that we're going to do is we're going to ask you to mention the patient's 9 characteristics of general appearance. So those 9 characteristics are level of consciousness, signs of distress, apparent state of health, skin color and obvious lesions, appropriate sexual development, posture, gait, and motor activity, body and breath odors, dress, grooming, and personal hygiene, and facial expressions. Altogether, once you do that, that would be a total of 17 points, and that's how you'll be graded for this portion of the physical exam. Thanks.